They say Walmart is always open, but the real darkness begins when the doors lock and the night shift takes over. Past midnight, those bright aisles seem endless, stretching into places that shouldn't exist. The air grows heavy, and the low hum of the lights starts to sound almost alive. Security cameras catch figures standing perfectly still at the end of aisles until they're suddenly much closer, even though no one saw them move. Employees whisper about cold spots in the frozen food section, mannequins that turn their heads, and customers that walk in, but never walk out. Sometimes the loudspeaker clicks on with a voice that doesn't belong to anyone working that night, calling a name that hasn't been on the payroll in years. Tonight, we're unlocking those doors. These are the true stories Walmart doesn't want you to hear. This is Farcical Fears. And once you enter, there's no guarantee you'll leave the same. If you've ever felt watched in a store, share your story below. Before the lights go out, let's move to our first story. They call it the Midnight Walmart, though that's not the store's real name. In official records, it's just another 24-hour supercenter, sitting off a lonely stretch of highway in a small Midwestern town. But ask the locals, especially the ones who've worked there during the graveyard shift, and they'll tell you that when the clock creeps past 12:03 a.m., something changes. The fluorescent lights hum just a little lower. The temperature in the aisles drops. And sometimes, when you turn a corner, you'll see something that isn't supposed to be there. The first time I heard about it, I thought it was just gossip. I was passing through on a cross-country drive and stopped at a diner around 11 p.m. for coffee. The waitress, a pale woman with deep shadows under her eyes, asked me where I was headed. I mentioned I might grab a few things from Walmart. Before getting back on the road, her hand, mid-pour with the coffee pot, froze. "You're not going there after midnight," she said flatly. It wasn't a question. I laughed it off and asked her why. She leaned in and whispered, "People go in and don't come out. Not all of them, just enough for us to notice. Sometimes it's shoppers. Sometimes it's workers. Sometimes it's folks who were just there to look around." She wouldn't say more, only muttered, "If you see the night manager, you leave. You don't speak to him. You don't even look at him." I thought she was pulling my leg. But then the cook behind the counter cleared his throat and added, "She's not lying. I used to stock shelves there. It's not right, you'll see." I should have left it alone. At 12:01 a.m., I pulled into the Walmart parking lot. It was massive and mostly empty, the far edges swallowed by darkness. A few lonely cars sat scattered across the asphalt. The place looked normal to normal, with its bright signage casting a sterile glow over the pavement. I told myself the stories were just local superstition. Inside, the first thing I noticed was the smell. Not the usual mix of plastic packaging and cheap cleaning supplies. This was something metallic, faint but sharp, like rust or blood. The second thing I noticed was that the store was almost silent. No music playing over the speakers, no hum of distant chatter, no squeak of cartwheels. I wandered past the self-checkouts, where a young cashier sat perfectly still, staring down at her hands. I said hello. She didn't respond, not even a blink. Her chest rose and fell, so she was breathing, but it was as if she couldn't hear me. The aisles felt longer than they should have been, stretching unnaturally far until the rows of products blurred together. I went looking for bottled water, my footsteps echoing in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up. That's when I saw him. The night manager. He was tall, too tall, with shoulders that seemed to taper wrong, like his bones didn't fit quite right under his skin. His uniform was spotless, but his face was wrong. The features didn't line up, like they'd been rearranged by someone who didn't quite understand human anatomy. His eyes, wide and glassy, locked onto me from the far end of the aisle. I froze. Remembering the waitress's warning, I looked away. My heart pounded so loudly, I could hear it in my ears. I turned down another aisle and walked quickly, trying to convince myself that it was just some oddly proportioned employee. But then I heard it, the faint squeak of shoes following me. Not a steady rhythm, but a strange, jerky pace. I ducked into the home goods section, weaving between displays. The shelves here seemed wrong to every item slightly off-center, every label facing just a bit away from the aisle. as if someone didn't want me reading them. The air was colder now, enough that my breath fogged in front of me. Then I saw something that made my stomach twist. In the middle of an aisle, neatly stacked in perfect symmetry, were shopping carts. Each one contained a single item, a pair of shoes, men's, women's, children's, all worn, all dirty. Some streaked with something dark and crusted. That's when I realized there were no other customers. Not a single one. The squeaking footsteps grew louder, and my panic rose. I cut across to the electronics section, hoping to find another employee. But the place looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Dust coated the counters. The display TVs were on, but instead of advertisements, they showed grainy black and white security footage of the store, from angles that didn't exist. One feed showed me standing in the electronics section from directly above. Another showed the cashier, still staring at her hands. Another showed a family I hadn't seen before, standing perfectly still in the middle of an aisle, facing away from the camera. Their heads twitched every few seconds like marionettes on tangled strings. I turned to leave, but the aisle behind me was gone. Not blocked, gone. The space stretched into an impossible hallway, lined with flickering overhead lights. The floor tiles became worn linoleum. The products on the shelves grew stranger. Glass jars filled with cloudy liquid, dolls with cracked faces, stacks of VHS tapes with no labels. Somewhere far behind me, I heard the night manager's voice for the first time. It was low, calm, almost soothing, but I couldn't make out the words. I didn't want to. Every instinct screamed that if I listened, I'd follow. I started running. The hallway shifted as I moved, bending at impossible angles. Sometimes, it felt like I was running uphill, sometimes like I was falling forward. At one point, I passed an aisle where dozens of people stood shoulder to shoulder, facing the shelves, unmoving. I didn't look closely, but I think I recognized the waitress from the diner. When I finally burst back into the main store, it was empty, completely empty. No cashier, no hum of the lights. Even the shelves were bare. The automatic doors slid open on their own, and I bolted into the parking lot. Only, it wasn't my car waiting there. It was the same lot, the same layout. But every single car was decades old, rusted, covered in leaves, flat tires sinking into cracked pavement. My heart slammed in my chest. The Walmart sign above me flickered, and for a second, the letters rearranged into something I couldn't read, a language that made my vision blur. I ran. I didn't stop until I was miles down the highway. When I got back to the diner the next morning, I tried to tell the waitress what happened. She just shook her head and said, "If you made it out, don't go back. People who leave once never get the same store twice." I checked later. The Walmart was gone, not closed, gone. The lot was empty, just weeds and gravel. No one in town admitted it had ever been there. But sometimes, when I'm driving late at night and see that familiar blue and white glow in the distance, I feel the urge to pull in. Just for a minute. I never do, because I know the night manager is still waiting. Let's move to our second story. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly, their glow casting a sterile, cold light across the endless aisles of the Walmart supercenter on the outskirts of a small, quiet town. The store was massive, a cavernous space, filled with towering shelves, stacked high with everything from canned goods to electronics, from toys to cleaning supplies. Most of the day, it was a bustling hive of activity, but at night, when the last customers had drifted out and the doors locked with a metallic clang, the store took on a different character entirely, one that Jason, a night shift stalker, was starting to dread. Jason had taken the night shift for extra pay, and the quiet it promised, but quiet here was deceptive. Since he started 6 months ago, he'd noticed odd things, small enough to dismiss at first, but piling up into a pattern of unease that gnawed at him in the darkest hours. It began with the cold spots. As he wheeled his cart down aisle 7, restocking canned soup, a sudden chill would prick the back of his neck, like a ghostly breath on his skin. The store's heating system was supposed to be on, but inexplicably, some corners of the building were always icy, even in summer. Then, there were the shadows. They never fully materialized, but at the edge of his vision, shapes flickered dark, shifting forms that melted away whenever he looked directly. It was as if the store itself had hidden eyes watching him. Lurking just beyond the reach of his flashlight beam, Jason's coworkers whispered about the Walmart ghost after a few months. An old story, they said, about a former employee named Tom who had vanished without a trace one night, years ago. No one knew exactly what had happened. Some said Tom had snapped, others that the store swallowed him whole. All that remained was the eerie legend. On certain nights, a man in a Walmart vest wandered the aisles, searching endlessly for something, or someone. One evening, about 3 weeks ago, Jason was working late, cleaning the frozen foods section. The hum of the refrigeration units filled the air with a low vibration. As he bent down to pick up a dropped can, he caught movement out of the corner of his eye. A figure stood near the dairy aisle, unmoving, face hidden in shadow. Jason called out, "Hey, you okay?" No answer. When he looked again, the figure was gone. He chalked it up to tired eyes. But then came the paging system. The intercom crackled to life, a voice whispering through the static. "Jason, Jason." He froze, heart thudding, but the system was silent. Moments later, he ran to the front office and checked the security monitors. All clear. Just a glitch, probably, he told himself. That night, as he closed down the electronics aisle, Jason felt a presence behind him. Turning sharply, flashlight sweeping the space, he saw a man wearing a Walmart vest, standing near the checkout registers. But this man looked wrong. His eyes were sunken and dark, his skin pale as chalk, and his expression blank and haunting. "Who are you?" Jason asked, his voice barely steady. The man didn't respond. Instead, he turned slowly and disappeared. Down the corridor leading to the storage rooms, Jason followed, each step echoing in the emptiness. As he rounded the corner, the lights flickered and went out. The sudden darkness swallowed him. His flashlight flickered, then went dead. The faint glow from emergency exit signs was all he had. Then came the footsteps, slow, heavy, approaching from the shadows. Jason's breath hitched. The footsteps circled him, coming closer, then retreating. Whispers surrounded him, unintelligible, yet filled with sorrow and rage. Desperate, he sprinted toward the exit. But the doors were locked tight. He was trapped in the following days. Jason researched the store's history, digging through old news archives and employee records. He discovered that years before, a night stalker named Tom had indeed vanished mysteriously. Security footage from that night was corrupted, the last recorded. Frames showing a shadowy figure moving through the aisles before the cameras went dead. No body was ever found, and the case was quietly closed. The store manager refused to discuss it. But the staff shared their own story's equipment, moving on its own. Strange noises after hours, mannequins that seemed to change position one night. Jason decided to confront whatever haunted the Walmart. He came prepared with a voice recorder, a camera, and a sense of grim determination. As the clock struck midnight, he began his rounds. The store felt alive with whispers and shifting shadows. His recorder picked up faint voices, low and desperate. In aisle 12, near the cleaning supplies, he saw a figure standing motionless, unmistakably. His face was gaunt, eyes hollow, and he reached out a trembling hand. Jason asked, "Tom, what happened to you?" The ghostly figure's mouth moved, but no sound came. Instead, a cold wind swept through the aisle, and Jason's flashlight flickered wildly. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the store. The lights went out, plunging Jason into darkness. The emergency exit signs dimmed and blinked. Jason felt cold hands grip his arms, pulling him toward the back rooms. He struggled, breaking free just long enough to stumble into the storage area. The door slammed shut behind him. Trapped in the cramped room, Jason heard the whispers turn into frantic cries. "Stay, stay with us." His camera caught fleeting images of shadowy figures pressed against the walls, their faces twisted in torment. Hours later, the morning staff found Jason collapsed near the entrance, eyes wide with terror, muttering incoherent words about ghosts and a man who never left. Jason quit the next day. Walmart remained open, the fluorescent lights still buzzing, the aisles stocked and waiting. But at night, those who worked the graveyard shift knew the truth. Some customers never check out. The ghost of Tom still roamed the aisles, searching for release. and the store's shadows held countless secrets, waiting for the next soul to get lost in the Walmart night. Let's move to our third story. Walmart was supposed to be just another job for Lisa's steady paycheck, manageable hours, and the kind of place she could work through until something better came along. But from the very first night on the graveyard shift, something felt off. The endless rows of products, normally mundane, seemed to warp in the low light. Shadows stretched too long, corners curled into darkness where no light reached, and the silence. It was heavy, almost alive. Lisa had heard the rumors ghost stories passed between night staff about things that shouldn't be possible. Customers who vanished, strange sounds in empty aisles, and a mysterious former employee who was said to haunt the store. At first, she dismissed it all as nonsense. Just the boredom and imagination of people stuck working the graveyard shift. But it wasn't long before her skepticism cracked. On her third week working nights, Lisa was assigned to restock the home. Appliances, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their hum blending with the quiet hum of refrigerators nearby. She worked steadily, placing coffee makers and toasters on the shelves, when a sudden chill brushed her skin. She looked up and saw, at the far end of aisle 13, a figure standing still. The man wore a Walmart vest like hers, but his posture was stiff, unnatural. His face was pale and gaunt, with eyes that seemed to be hollow sockets. Lisa blinked, and when she looked again, he was gone. Her heart raced, but she told herself it was a trick of the light. The next night, as she walked through the electronics aisle, she heard a faint, brittle laugh, like that of a child's. The sound was eerie, echoing softly between the shelves, lined with TVs and sound systems. Lisa stopped, calling out, but the aisle was empty. The laughter faded, leaving behind an oppressive silence that made her skin crawl. Nights like that became more frequent. Lisa noticed the temperature dropping in certain parts of the store, especially aisle 13, which employees had started calling the cold zone. Lights flickered unpredictably, plunging the aisles into brief darkness before buzzing back to life. The humming of machines sometimes warped into whispers, indistinct but full of sorrow and anger. One night the paging system crackled to life, with a faint whisper, "Help me, please." Lisa's blood ran cold. She ran to the security room and checked the surveillance monitors. The store was empty, no movement except the gentle sway of hanging signs. The more she investigated, the more she learned about Daniel, a night stalker, who had vanished years ago under mysterious circumstances. He had worked alone on the graveyard shift, and rumors claimed he had heard voices, seen things that no one else could. Some employees believed his spirit still haunted the store. Trapped in its endless aisles, determined to find the truth, Lisa stayed late one night after her shift. Alone in the empty store, with only her flashlight cutting through the darkness, she walked slowly toward aisle 13. The air grew colder, heavier. Shadows seemed to ripple at the edge of her vision. Suddenly, the hollow-eyed figure appeared again, stepping forward with unnatural speed. Lisa stumbled back, dropping her flashlight, which shattered on the floor. She felt a cold grip seize her wrist, freezing her in place. The store shifted around her. Walls stretched into endless darkness, aisles twisted into a maze. Whispers turned to screams. Lisa was trapped, alone with Daniel's restless spirit. Hours later, the morning crew found the store doors locked from the inside. Lisa was nowhere to be found. Only her broken flashlight and the echo of whispered, "Please" remained. Lisa's story did not end there. In the days after her disappearance, strange occurrences escalated. New night shift employees reported hearing footsteps when no one was around. The distant sound of a man muttering to himself just beyond the camera's reach. The security footage showed fleeting glimpses of a gaunt figure lurking near the store's rear exits and disappearing into walls. Management tried to dismiss the claims, attributing the phenomena to technical glitches and overactive imaginations. But the employees knew better. A dark presence haunted the store, growing stronger with every passing night. One brave young man named Eric, a new hire determined to uncover the truth, started his own investigation. Armed with a camera and a voice recorder, he spent nights wandering the store, hoping to capture evidence of the supernatural. On his first night, Eric ventured into aisle 13. The cold there was unbearable, breath fogging in the air. He called out softly, "Daniel, are you here?" The response was a chilling whisper, carried by a sudden gust of wind. "Leave." Ignoring the warning, Eric pressed on. His camera caught flickering shadows that moved against the natural flow of light. The voice recorder picked up low moans and unintelligible whispers in the electronics aisle. His camera's night vision caught a figure pale, hollow-eyed, and wearing a Walmart vest. The figure seemed to reach out, its hand passing through Eric as if he were air. Eric stumbled back, heart pounding, but he refused to leave. As the nights went on, Eric pieced together the tragic story of Daniel, a man pushed to the brink by isolation and unexplained phenomena. Daniel's mind had shattered in the endless solitude of the night shift. The stress and fear consumed him until he vanished without a trace, his spirit trapped in the store's labyrinthine aisles. Eric realized that Daniel was not just a ghost. He was a prisoner of the store's dark energy, cursed to roam and haunt those who took the graveyard shift. One night, Eric tried to communicate directly. Using the voice recorder, he repeated questions, hoping for a clear answer. "Why are you here? What do you want?" The reply came slowly, voice trembling and broken. "Trapped. Help me. Don't stay." Suddenly, the lights flickered violently. The aisles seemed to twist and close in around Eric. His flashlight died. Panic surged as cold hands brushed his skin, and ghostly figures swirled in the shadows. He ran blindly through the store, the emergency exit doors seeming farther away than before, the path twisting endlessly. Hours later, Eric was found outside the locked store, breathless and shaking, his camera shattered. He spoke of the labyrinth and the lost souls, warning anyone who would listen to stay away from the night shift. But the store never closed. The night shift continued, with new employees unaware of the darkness lurking just beyond the fluorescent lights, and the ghost of Daniel waiting for the next soul to wander the aisles. Alone after dark, Walmart wasn't just a store anymore. It was a trap, a maze of shadows and despair, a haunted labyrinth that swallowed those who dared to work. The graveyard shift. Let's move to our fourth story. The fluorescent lights inside the Walmart flickered intermittently as Mark clocked in for his first night shift. Fresh out of college and struggling to find a stable job, he had reluctantly accepted the graveyard shift position. The store was vast and mostly empty at this hour, the silence broken only by the hum of refrigerators and the distant beep of cash registers. At first, the job was dull stocking shelves, tidying aisles, and occasionally assisting a late-night customer. But there was an undeniable heaviness to the air, a stillness that felt unnatural. Mark brushed off the feeling as nerves, or perhaps exhaustion from working late hours. His first few nights passed uneventfully, but the feeling of being watched never quite left him. The deep hum of the store's refrigeration units seemed to pulse like a heartbeat, and shadows in the corners twisted unnaturally whenever he glanced their way. The blinking exit signs cast an eerie red glow that never seemed to brighten, no matter how long he stared. Then, on his third night, the strange occurrences began in earnest. While arranging boxers in the back storage area, Mark heard faint tapping like fingernails drumming on metal. He paused, heart quickening, but saw nothing. The sound stopped as suddenly as it began, leaving behind a cold silence so thick he could almost taste it. That same night, as he stalked the frozen foods aisle, Mark noticed something carved into the floor tiles near the freezer section, an arrangement of strange, jagged symbols. The etchings didn't match anything he had ever seen. They seemed ancient, yet freshly made, the edges still sharp. The cold seeped through his shoes as he knelt to inspect them, curious and unnerved. Mark asked his supervisor the next day about the symbols, but the man just laughed it off, telling him to stop overthinking and focus on his job. Mark sensed the man was hiding something, but pressed no further. Over the following nights, the symbols began to multiply. They appeared etched into the backs of shelves, smeared onto mirrors in the employee restroom, and even scratched into the glass panels of the store's entrance doors. Their presence grew like a dark stain spreading through the store. One night, as Mark patrolled aisle 17 with his flashlight, the store's PA system crackled to life. Static filled the speakers, then a distorted, whispering voice repeated a chilling phrase, "Find me, before it's too late." The words sent a shiver down Mark's spine. His breath came quick and shallow as the lights flickered above, threatening to plunge the aisle into darkness. The words echoed in his mind long after the announcement ended. Determined to uncover the truth, Mark began researching the store's history during his breaks. What he found was deeply disturbing. Decades before, the land beneath the Walmart had been the site of a small, isolated settlement. Local lore told of a group of settlers who vanished mysteriously, leaving behind strange symbols and accounts of dark rituals. Some said the settlers had tried to summon protective spirits, but instead unleashed a curse that lingered in the soil. More recently, several night shift workers had disappeared without explanation. Their last known whereabouts were always near the frozen foods section or the seldom-used maintenance tunnels beneath the building. As Mark delved deeper, his nights grew darker. The store seemed to resist his probing. Shadows warped and stretched in impossible ways. Shelves that had been neat and orderly one moment were toppled and scattered the next, only to appear undisturbed when supervisors checked. One evening, Mark noticed frost creeping along the freezer aisle walls, thicker and more vivid than usual. His breath came out in visible clouds, even though the store's thermostat was set at normal temperatures. Through the frosted glass, he caught sight of a pale figure, a woman, with hollow, sorrowful eyes staring back at him. She mouthed words he couldn't hear, her presence simultaneously tragic and terrifying. When he blinked, she was gone. Terrified, but determined. Mark returned to the back storage room and discovered an old journal hidden beneath a loose floorboard. The leather-bound book belonged to a man named Thomas, a night stalker from decades earlier who had chronicled his own descent into madness and fear. Thomas wrote of a shadowy figure stalking the store, of voices that whispered promises of power but came with a terrible price. His final entry was a desperate plea for help before it abruptly ended. One night, guided by clues in the journal, Mark ventured into the store's sealed maintenance tunnels. The air was thick with rot and ancient dust. Symbols scorched into the concrete glowed faintly, pulsating with dark energy. In the depths, he found an altar constructed from twisted metal and broken electronics. Charred remnants of candles and strange talismans littered the floor. The oppressive presence in the air thickened. Suddenly, a dark, shifting figure materialized, burning like coals. Its voice echoing inside Mark's mind, offering release from fear and pain in exchange for his soul. Mark refused. Reciting a passage from Thomas's journal meant to banish the darkness. The store shook violently. Lights exploded and alarms blared. When the chaos subsided, the shadows withdrew and the first pale rays of dawn touched the empty aisles. Mark emerged, battered but alive. The curse seemed lifted. Yet as he left the store, a creeping sensation told him some part of the darkness remained, waiting, patient, hungry. In the weeks following, strange incidents persisted. Employees reported hearing disembodied whispers near the freezer aisle, cold spots that could not be explained, and objects moving on their own. The nightly feeling of being watched never abated. Mark's co-workers began to avoid aisle 17, calling it the haunted aisle. The store's management ignored the complaints, attributing them to overwork and stress, but the truth was far darker. One night, Mark encountered a new employee named Rachel, who confided that her brother had vanished. After working a night shift at the same Walmart years ago, she believed the store was cursed and wanted to help Mark find a way to end the nightmare together. They uncovered old newspaper clippings about the settlers' mysterious disappearance and the cult that had tried to harness dark forces in the area. The ritual had been meant to protect, but had unleashed a malevolent entity that fed on fear and despair. Their investigations led them back to the altar beneath the store, where they discovered relics infused with dark magic. Using protective symbols from Thomas's journal and information from local folklore, Mark and Rachel prepared a ritual to cleanse the store. On the chosen night, armed with candles, salt, and the journal, they descended into the tunnels. The malevolent entity resisted fiercely. Shadows lunged, the ground trembled, and ghostly wails filled the air. But Mark and Rachel stood firm, chanting the incantations. The altar cracked, and a blinding light filled the chamber. When the light faded, the oppressive presence had lifted. The store was silent, peaceful. The hauntings ceased. Employees returned to their work without fear. Mark and Rachel knew the darkness was not destroyed, only pushed back. The curse of Walmart's night shift was broken at least for now. Let's move to our fifth story. James had been working the night shift at Walmart for almost 6 months when the first truly unsettling experience occurred. At first, the job had been simple: restocking shelves, cleaning aisles, and occasionally assisting the rare late-night customer. The dull monotony was a strange comfort for James, especially after the chaos of his previous jobs. The fluorescent lights hummed constantly overhead, casting a harsh, unnatural glow over the endless rows of merchandise. The air smelled faintly of plastic, bleach, and the cold chill radiating from the refrigerators. But as autumn faded into a biting winter, a peculiar heaviness settled over the store. At times it felt less like a place of commerce and more like a prison, one with endless aisles that twisted and folded back on themselves in impossible ways. James couldn't shake the sensation that the store was watching him, that something unseen was tracking his every move. On a particularly cold night, James was tasked with restocking the grocery aisles near the back of the store. The hum of refrigeration units blended with the steady drip of a leaking pipe somewhere in the ceiling. As he placed cans and boxers on the shelves, he noticed that the products near the end of the aisle seemed disturbed. Cans were teetering precariously, and some boxers had been pulled halfway off the shelves. There were no customers around, and the last stocking crew had passed through hours earlier. The familiar order of the aisles was broken, replaced by an eerie disarray that set James's nerves on edge. Shrugging it off as a prank, or perhaps an animal, he continued his work. But as he rounded the corner, toward the snack aisle, an unmistakable tapping sound began, rhythmic, deliberate, like fingernails drumming against a metal surface. The sound was faint but persistent, coming from somewhere deep within the shadows. At the aisle's far end, James stopped, his breath catching in his throat, eyes darting into the darkness. "Hello?" he called out, voice trembling. Only silence answered, save for the tapping that continued relentlessly. He took a hesitant step forward, then another, but saw nothing. The aisles stretched endlessly, the stacks of products looming like walls in a maze. The tapping stopped abruptly, replaced by an unnatural stillness that pressed in from all sides. The next week, things grew worse. The store's automatic doors began to open and close without warning, their sensors detecting invisible presences. James sometimes caught glimpses of shadows flitting just beyond his peripheral vision. The security cameras, monitored from the dimly lit security room, frequently glitched, showing brief flickers of a gaunt figure wearing a Walmart vest wandering the aisles. Worse still, faint voices whispered through the store's PA system, unintelligible at first, then gradually growing louder. At times, the voices seemed to call James's name, urging him toward the darker corners of the store, the employee break rooms, the shadowed storage areas, even the seldom-used stairwells that led to the basement tunnels. The more James tried to ignore the phenomena, the more relentless they became. Sleep-deprived and haunted, he began to research the history of the Walmart location. His efforts revealed a sinister past few knew about. Decades ago, the land had been home to a small, isolated community. Legend told of a cult practicing dark rituals in the area, invoking ancient powers to protect their settlement from outsiders. But the rituals went horribly wrong, unleashing a curse that claimed the lives of many townsfolk. The settlement was abandoned overnight, its people vanished without a trace. The land remained cursed, untouched for years, until Walmart was built atop it. Since then, night shift workers at the store reported eerie phenomena: sudden cold spots, shadows that moved independently of light sources, and phantom footsteps echoing in empty aisles. Some employees had disappeared mysteriously, leaving no trace but whispers in the staff rooms. Determined to uncover the truth and break the curse, James dove deeper. He discovered the story of Daniel, a former night stalker who vanished without explanation. Rumors said Daniel had been driven mad by the voices in the store, wandering its endless aisles until he was lost forever. Some believed his restless spirit haunted the store, trapped between the shelves. One night, armed with a flashlight and the old journal James had uncovered in the staff locker room, Daniel's diary. He ventured into the darkest corners of the store. The pages described Daniel's slow descent into terror, his paranoia growing as the store's darkness consumed him. The diary warned of a shadowy figure, a malevolent presence that stalked the aisles at night. James's heart pounded as he walked toward the refrigerated section. The air grew colder, frost gathering on the linoleum floor. From the corner of his eye, he saw a figure, pale, hollow-eyed, wearing a Walmart vest stained with grime, gliding silently past the freezers. James froze, breath hitching. The figure turned slowly, revealing sunken cheeks and eyes that held infinite sorrow. "You shouldn't be here," it whispered, voice echoing from a place beyond. James stumbled back, tripping over a box and dropping his flashlight. Darkness swallowed him. Moments later, the emergency lights flickered on, casting a weak red glow. The apparition was gone. Shaken but undeterred, James pressed on. Guided by the diary's clues, he discovered a hidden maintenance tunnel beneath the store, a labyrinth of damp concrete corridors, long sealed off from employees. The air was thick with rot, and something else, something ancient and malevolent, in the heart of the tunnels. James found an altar of twisted metal and shattered electronics. Symbols burned into the walls glowed faintly, casting eerie shadows. The air vibrated with a dark energy that threatened to crush his lungs. Suddenly, the shadows coalesced into a massive form, a writhing, shifting mass of darkness, with glowing red eyes. It spoke without moving its mouth, its voice flooding James's mind with promises of power and freedom. But at a terrible cost. James gripped the diary, reciting a protective incantation Daniel had penned in his final, desperate entry. The shadows screamed and writhed, the store trembling violently as the curse fought for survival. Then, silence. When the light stabilized, the oppressive darkness had receded. James emerged from the tunnels, shaken but alive. The next morning, the store felt lighter, the aisles no longer suffocating. But James knew the fight was not over. Some darkness remained patient, waiting, lurking just beyond the light. Let's move to our sixth story. Evan prided himself on being a practical man. Fresh out of college, and armed with a business degree, he was confident his new night shift job at Walmart would be a temporary stop, a way to pay rent, while he figured out the next step. The fluorescent lights, the endless aisles stocked with everything from canned goods to televisions, and the low hum of refrigeration units were all familiar, almost comforting. The routine was simple, predictable. That was, until the nights started to shift. The first sign that something was wrong came on his second week. It was late, and the store was nearly empty. Evan was restocking the snack aisle, aisle 9, when the lights overhead flickered violently. The buzzing overhead speakers cut out abruptly, leaving an eerie silence. A sudden chill crept over him, making his breath visible, despite the store's normally warm temperature. He looked up and down the aisle, and for a fleeting moment, the shelves seemed to stretch farther than they should, blurring at the edges like a mirage. His heart pounded. Shaking off the unease, Evan went back to work, but the feeling lingered. Later that night, he noticed something strange on one of the support columns near the frozen foods section, a jagged symbol, crudely painted, in what looked like rust or dried blood. The twisted circle, with branching lines, radiated an unnatural cold that made his skin crawl. As he stared, the lights dimmed, and a figure seemed to shift in the shadows beyond the aisle. He blinked, and it was gone. Evan's coworkers dismissed his concerns as fatigue or overactive imagination. Except for Marie, a veteran night shift worker with graying hair and wary eyes. She warned him about aisle 9. "Stay clear after midnight," she told him one evening, voice low and urgent. "It's cursed. Something dark lives there." But curiosity gnawed at Evan. The more he avoided aisle 9, the more he felt drawn to it, as if an unseen force beckoned. The restless energy seeped into his dreams. At night, he would see fleeting images of hollow-eyed figures drifting between the shelves, hear faint whispers calling his name. His reflection in the break room mirror twisted into grotesque shapes that disappeared when he blinked. One night, while alone in the electronics section, Evan's phone buzzed with an alert. The store's security cameras had detected motion in aisle 9, despite it being empty. He decided to investigate. Armed with a flashlight, He stepped into aisle 9. The air immediately grew frigid, and the familiar scent of plastic and food faded into something metallic and decayed. The shelves seemed to close in, warping around him. The aisle stretched endlessly, no exit in sight. The light from his flashlight flickered and died, plunging him into darkness. In the blackness, Evan felt cold fingers trail down his spine and heard faint breathing. Panic surged as shadowy figures emerged from the gloom, twisted gaunt shapes, with hollow eyes, silently watching. A voice echoed through the dark, a low, guttural whisper. "You belong here." Evan ran blindly, the store folding and twisting into a labyrinthian nightmare. Walls bled shadows, floors rippled like water, and the voices multiplied, screaming and laughing in a cacophony of madness. He stumbled into a cavernous chamber beneath the store. A forgotten space filled with ancient symbols, carved into stone walls, and a black altar adorned with broken electronics and withered offerings. There, the shadowy presence awaited, a towering, shifting mass of darkness with eyes like burning coals. It spoke without words, flooding Evan's mind with promises of power and eternal night in exchange for his soul. He resisted, clutching the journal he'd found hidden behind the staff lockers. The diary of a former employee, driven mad by the store's curse, chanting the protective incantations scribbled on the pages. Evan battled the entity's will. The store shook violently, lights exploded, and the darkness screamed before retreating into the shadows. Exhausted and trembling, Evan emerged from the chamber as dawn's pale light filtered through the windows. The store was silent and still, but Evan was forever changed. His eyes held a hollow emptiness, and at times he would mutter the same chilling phrase he'd heard in the darkness. "You belong here." Marie watched him warily, knowing the curse of aisle 9 had claimed another soul. Over the following weeks, strange phenomena persisted. Employees whispered of cold spots near the frozen foods, disembodied footsteps echoing in empty aisles, and shadows flickering just out of sight. Some quit, unwilling to face the store's growing darkness. Those who stayed learned to avoid aisle 9 after midnight. Where the curse festered and hunger waited, Evan struggled against the darkness within, but it clawed at him relentlessly. Night after night, the whispers returned, the visions worsened. He knew the entity was patient, waiting for him to surrender. One stormy night, Evan returned to aisle 9 alone. The store was deserted, lights flickering with each thunderclap. He stepped into the cold, warped aisle, feeling the familiar grip of the curse tightening around him. The walls pulsed like a living thing, the shadows lengthening and reaching. From the darkness emerged, the entity now more solid, its fiery eyes blazing. It reached out, tendrils of shadow curling around Evan's body, dragging him toward the black altar. But this time, Evan fought back, drawing strength from the journal and the memory of Marie's warnings. He screamed an incantation that shattered the shadows. The store convulsed, the entity howling in fury as it was banished. For now, exhausted and broken, Evan collapsed on the floor, gasping. The curse was weakened, but not destroyed. The store's dark heart still beat beneath the aisles, waiting for the next soul to wander too far into the night. Let's move to our Seven Saints story. The night air outside the Walmart was crisp, a biting chill that gnawed through Evan's jacket as he stepped into the parking lot. The sprawling building loomed before him, its harsh fluorescent sign flickering, like a dying eye in the darkness. For months, he had worked the night shift here, enduring the monotony of the quiet hours, the empty aisles, and the occasional late-night customer. But tonight felt different. There was an unsettling weight to the air, as if the building itself breathed a silent warning. Evan hesitated at the automatic doors, the usual mechanical whoosh, replaced by an unnatural silence. The store was supposed to be open for the night, yet it felt abandoned, cold and hollow. As he pushed inside, the fluorescent lights flickered erratically, casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to move on their own accord. The first hours passed uneventfully, the routine, familiar, yet hauntingly distant. Evan moved through the aisles, restocking shelves and organizing displays, but the feeling of being watched gnawed at him. Every reflective surface, a polished tile floor, a glossy cereal box. The dark screen of a turned-off TV seemed to hold a pair of eyes staring. Back. Near midnight, The intercom crackled, and a faint whisper echoed through the store. It was indistinct, barely audible, but unmistakably a voice calling his name. Evan froze, heart hammering in his chest. No customers were present. He was alone. Shaking off the chill, he continued his tasks, but the store seemed to shift around him. The aisles elongated unnaturally, twisting and folding, as if the building itself were alive. He caught glimpses of figures shadowy, indistinct, lurking, just out of reach, vanishing when he tried to focus on them. As the night deepened, the lights dimmed further, plunging parts of the store into darkness. A low hum began to resonate, growing louder and more insistent, vibrating through the floor beneath his feet. Evan's breath fogged in the air, despite the warmth, and a sense of cold dread settled over him. He tried to reach the security office, but found the corridors twisting into a maze, the familiar paths warping into a labyrinth of endless shelves and shadowed corners. Panic set in as the store transformed around him, the boundaries between reality and nightmare blurring. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the electronics aisle. Evan hurried toward the sound, flashlight cutting through the darkness. There, a television flickered to life on its own, displaying static before a pale, gaunt face appeared on the screen. Eyes hollow and accusing, Evan stumbled back, heart racing, as the figure on the screen mouthed words he couldn't hear. The store's PA system burst into static. Then, an unearthly chorus of whispers filled the air, surrounding him from all sides. He ran, weaving through the endless aisles, shadows chasing. At his heels, the temperature plummeted. Frost formed on the shelves and floors. His flashlight flickered, threatening to die as cold fingers brushed past him, leaving icy trails on his skin. Desperation drove him toward the employee exit, but the doors refused to budge. Behind him, the shadows coalesced into a towering figure, cloaked in darkness, eyes glowing like embers. It spoke without words, a voice resonating deep in Evan's mind. "You belong here," summoning every ounce of courage. Evan remembered the talisman a fellow night shift worker had given him, a small charm etched with ancient symbols. Clutching it tightly, he chanted the protective phrases the worker had taught him. The figure recoiled, shrieking in rage, as the store trembled violently. Lights exploded in a shower of sparks. The shadows writhed and screamed before dissipating into nothingness. When dawn broke, the store was silent, the oppressive darkness lifted. Evan emerged, shaken but alive, knowing the battle had been won for now. But deep beneath the Walmart, in the forgotten tunnels where the shadows had writhed, something stirred, waiting patiently for the night to fall once more. Evan spent the next few days in a haze, caught between disbelief and fear. His coworkers exchanged uneasy glances, whispering behind closed doors. The incident had rattled everyone, though the daylight hours returned to their usual dull rhythm. Evan knew something had shifted beneath the surface. The charm he clutched, a small metal pendant etched with strange runes, seemed to hum faintly against his chest, a reminder that the darkness was never far away. He sought out Marie, the oldest night shift worker, hoping to learn more about the store's unsettling history. Marie's eyes clouded with sorrow when he mentioned the shadowy figure. "This place has always had secrets," she said quietly. "When I started here, the night shifts were haunted by whispers and cold spots. Some swear the land beneath us was cursed long before Walmart was built." She pulled out an old, leather-bound notebook, its pages yellowed with age. This belonged to a former employee who vanished without a trace. His notes tell of strange symbols, rituals, and an entity that feeds on fear and despair. Evan pored over the notebook, discovering detailed accounts of the store's labyrinthian underground tunnels, forgotten maintenance shafts that twisted beneath the aisles like veins. The entity, it seemed, dwelled there, growing stronger with every lost soul, driven by a mixture of terror and determination. Evan resolved to confront the darkness once and for all. The following night, armed with the charm, a flashlight, and the notebook, Evan ventured into the bowels of the Walmart. The entrance to the tunnels was concealed behind a false wall in the storage room, dust and cobwebs guarding the secrets below. As he descended the narrow staircase, the air grew thick with mildew and a stifling cold. The fluorescent hum faded, replaced by an oppressive silence broken only by Evan's footsteps. Walls bore ancient carvings, symbols similar to those etched on the charm. They pulsed faintly with an otherworldly light, guiding him deeper into the maze. Suddenly, a guttural growl echoed through the tunnels. Evan's flashlight beam shook as shadows slithered across the walls, coalescing into writhing shapes. The entity was aware. Voices whispered, a chorus of torment and despair, promising oblivion or power. Evan gripped the charm, reciting protective incantations from the notebook. The shadows lunged, tendrils of darkness reaching to snuff out his light. Evan felt cold seep into his bones, numbness spreading like poison. But he pressed forward, driven by willpower and the desperate hope of escape. At the heart of the tunnels, he found a chamber, an altar of obsidian and rusted metal, surrounded by burnt offerings and faded symbols. The air vibrated with evolence. The entity emerged, a towering mass of shifting shadows and glowing embers, eyes burning with ancient hunger. It spoke directly into Evan's mind, voices layered in cruelty and sorrow. You cannot run. You belong to the darkness. Evan raised the charm, its runes blazing with light. He chanted the incantation with growing strength, the shadows screaming in fury. The chamber shook, the altar cracked, and the entity howled before dissipating. Into the darkness, Evan collapsed, breathless and bruised. But victorious. Back in the store above, the atmosphere shifted. The air felt lighter, the shadows receded, and the whispers faded. But the battle had taken its toll. Evan's eyes held a haunted depth, and sometimes, in the dead of night, he swore he heard the entity's voice, soft, insistent, calling him back. Walmart's aisles returned to their mundane quiet, but those who worked the night shifts knew the truth. Darkness lurked beneath, waiting, patient, eternal, and some nights, the shadows stir. Let's move to our 8 Saint story. Deep in the heart of a quiet town stood a Walmart unlike any other place that locals whispered about, but seldom dared approach after sunset. The store was massive, sprawling across acres of concrete and steel, its fluorescent lights burning like cold stars against the night sky. By day, it was a bustling hub of commerce and community, but by night, something far darker took hold. No one knew exactly when the strange occurrences began. Some said it was built on cursed land, others blamed the restless spirits of the past. Employees spoke in hushed tones about fleeting shadows, strange noises, and a presence that watched from the darkest corners. But no one was prepared for what would happen when the night shift. Crew encountered the true horror lurking inside. Jacob was a new hire, eager and hardworking. But he soon discovered that working the graveyard shift was unlike anything he'd imagined. From the moment he stepped inside, a cold sense of unease wrapped around him like a shroud. The endless aisles seemed to stretch beyond reason, twisting and warping under the harsh fluorescent glare. The products on the shelves were arranged perfectly during the day, but at night they shifted mysteriously. Cans toppling, and boxes repositioning themselves, as if moved by unseen hands. One night, as Jacob stalked the shelves in the electronics department, he noticed a flickering television set, displaying static. Drawn to it, he approached, only to see a faint figure reflected in the screen, a pale, gaunt man with hollow eyes staring back. Jacob blinked, and the figure vanished, leaving only the dull hum of the TV. That night, the intercom system crackled to life on its own, whispering unintelligible words that sent chills down his spine. The overhead lights dimmed and brightened in erratic pulses, casting sinister shadows that danced across the aisles. Footsteps echoed in empty corridors, and Jacob felt eyes tracking his every move. The store seemed to come alive with malevolent intent, twisting the familiar into something grotesque. Employees reported missing hours, waking up in strange parts of the building with no memory of how they got there. Some spoke of waking nightmares that bled into reality, blurring the lines between waking and sleep. Determined to uncover the truth, Jacob began to investigate the history of the store and the land it occupied. He uncovered old newspaper clippings detailing a tragedy decades before. A cult had once inhabited the area, performing dark rituals that ended in mass disappearances. The land was cursed, a gateway between worlds, and the Walmart was built on top of it, As Jacob delved deeper, the hauntings intensified. He was plagued by visions of shadowy figures lurking just out of sight, whispering secrets in languages he couldn't understand. The temperature dropped suddenly, and frost formed on the floor, even though the heating was on. One night he found a hidden door behind a false wall in the storage room, a gateway to an ancient underground chamber filled with arcane symbols and broken relics. Inside the chamber, Jacob confronted the dark presence, feeding off the fear and despair of those trapped inside. A swirling vortex of shadows and eyes opened before him, a portal to a nightmare realm where lost souls screamed and wailed. The entity spoke directly to Jacob's mind, promising power and knowledge at a terrible cost. Jacob fought back, with every ounce of courage, reciting prayers and wielding a charm given by a dying employee who had been consumed by the darkness. The battle shook the very foundations of the Walmart, and when dawn finally broke, the entity was banished for now, but the store's curse remained, lurking beneath the surface, waiting for the next soul to wander too deep into its shadows. Jacob's days blurred into nights as the Walmart's grip tightened around him. The charm he carried, a small amulet etched with symbols from the ancient chamber, was his only protection. But even that seemed to grow cold and dim with each passing hour. Sleep eluded him, replaced by nightmares where the store twisted into an endless maze of corridors filled with whispering shadows and grasping hands. He confided in Marie, the veteran night shift worker who had warned him early on. Her eyes, once sharp, now held a haunted look, as if she'd seen too much darkness to forget. "They say the land's cursed, Jacob. This place feeds on fear. The longer you stay, the deeper it pulls you in." Jacob scoured the internet and local archives, piecing together the store's grim past. Decades ago, a cult known as the Children of the Veil had inhabited the land, performing rituals meant to open gateways to other realms. They believed in transcending mortal limits by sacrificing souls and binding spirits to this world. The cult was destroyed by frightened townsfolk, but the rituals had left a wound, a thin veil between dimensions where darkness seeped through. The Walmart was built without knowledge of the curse beneath, a beacon that attracted restless spirits and malevolent forces. The more Jacob learned, the more the hauntings escalated. The lights flickered uncontrollably, plunging parts of the store into deep darkness. Mannequins seemed to shift position when no one was looking, their glassy eyes following employees. The intercom would burst to life with static and whispered threats. Items vanished, only to reappear in impossible places. One night, while cleaning the aisles, Jacob felt a cold breath on his neck and spun to see a shadow slip between the shelves. His flashlight flickered and went out, plunging him into darkness. Panic rising, he fumbled for his phone to use as a light. But the battery was dead. Suddenly, a chilling voice echoed from the shadows, speaking in a language that seemed to twist the very air. "You are mine," it hissed. Jacob ran, heart pounding, as the aisles warped and shifted, trapping him in a nightmare labyrinth. He screamed for help, but only his voice answered, echoing endlessly. At the center of the labyrinth, he found the hidden chamber once more. The altar was cracked, pulsing with dark energy, surrounded by faded symbols that glowed with an unholy light. The entity emerged, a mass of darkness with glowing red eyes and tendrils of shadow. It spoke directly to Jacob's mind, promising power and eternal life if he would surrender. Jacob clutched his amulet, reciting the ancient incantations from the dying employee's journal. Light burst from the charm, pushing back the shadows. The entity howled in rage as it was forced to retreat, but not before warning Jacob, "This is not the end. The veil is thin, and the darkness is patient." Exhausted and terrified, Jacob emerged from the tunnels as dawn broke, the store returning to its eerie normalcy. But he knew better. The darkness was never truly gone. It was waiting, always hungry, ready to claim the next lost soul. Let's move to our 9st story. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering sporadically like the heartbeat of a dying beast as Maya stepped onto the cold linoleum floor of the Walmart night shift. She was a temp, brought in to cover the graveyard hours, but even before her first shift, rumors of the store's sinister past had reached her ears. Stories of unexplained disappearances, strange noises echoing through the aisles, and employees who never returned to their families. Maya tried to dismiss the whispers as idle gossip, the kind of spooky tales that attach themselves to any old building after dark. But as she clocked in and walked through the automatic doors, an unnatural chill crawled over her skin, setting her nerves on edge. The familiar scent of fresh plastic and cleaning products was there, but beneath it lurked something fouler, undercurrent of decay and despair that seemed to seep from the very walls. Her first hours were uneventful, filled with the usual tasks of restocking shelves and monitoring the quiet store. But when the clock struck midnight, the atmosphere shifted. The temperature dropped abruptly, her breath puffing out in frosty clouds despite the store's climate control. Shadows lengthened and warped, taking on shapes that flickered just beyond her peripheral vision. Maya noticed that aisle 7, normally just another stretch of canned goods and snacks, seemed off. The shelves looked warped, the products mishelved, and sometimes even absent, as if invisible hands had rifled through them. She caught glimpses of figures standing motionless at the aisle's end, vanishing whenever she turned to look. The overhead speakers crackled with bursts of static, interrupted by faint, unintelligible whispers that echoed eerily through the empty store. Maya's heart hammered in her chest as she clutched her flashlight, every instinct screaming to get out. But duty and curiosity kept her rooted. As the nights wore on, Maya's experiences grew darker and more disturbing. Employees began to vanish without explanation, leaving behind only abandoned workstations and half-finished inventory lists. The store's security footage showed glimpses of shadowy forms drifting through the aisle's figures, too distorted and fast-moving to identify, but undeniably not human. One evening, Maya found an old, blood-stained employee badge tucked beneath a loose floor tile. The name on it was smudged, but familiar on employee, who had disappeared months earlier. The badge felt unnervingly cold in her hand, as if it still held the lingering essence of its owner. Driven by fear and determination, Maya sought out the store's old blueprints and maintenance logs, uncovering a hidden basement level sealed off for decades. The basement had once been a storage and utility area, but was abruptly closed after a series of mysterious accidents and reports of strange noises. Rumors hinted at something darker, a space where the fabric between worlds had thinned. One night, guided by the flashlight and a growing sense of dread, Maya found the hidden stairwell concealed behind a stack of abandoned pallets. As she descended, the air grew heavy with rot and stale water. The faint sound of dripping echoed in the darkness, accompanied by the distant sound of whispers and soft sobbing. The basement was a labyrinth of rusted pipes, cracked concrete, and forgotten machinery. Walls were scrawled with arcane symbols, some glowing faintly with an eerie, unnatural light. At its center was a sealed door, reinforced with steel and ancient runes. It vibrated with an otherworldly energy, pulsing like a heartbeat. Maya's flashlight flickered as the door creaked open slowly, revealing a vast chamber beyond a place that seemed to exist outside time. Shadows moved independently of any source, twisting and writhing like living things. The air shimmered with unseen forces, and distant screams echoed faintly. Within the chamber, a mass of darkness coalesced, an entity, ancient and malevolent, feeding on fear and despair. It reached out with tendrils of shadow, pulling Maya toward an abyssal pit filled with writhing faces and lost souls. The entity whispered promises of power and knowledge, but demanded a terrible price, her very essence. Maya fought to resist, clutching a pendant she'd found earlier, relic etched with protective symbols. She recited prayers and invocations she barely understood, the pendant glowing with blinding light that pushed back the darkness. The chamber shook violently, the entity screaming in fury before retreating into the shadows. The door slammed shut behind her as she stumbled back into the basement corridor, heart pounding and breath ragged. When Maya emerged into the early dawn light, the store was eerily quiet. The curse was weakened but not destroyed. The Walmart still held its secrets, waiting patiently for the next soul to wander too far into its shadows. Maya barely slept after that night. The pendant in her pocket seemed to pulse with warmth, but she knew the darkness was far from gone. Every creak of the house, every flicker of light made her jump. She avoided the store whenever possible, but the shifts kept piling up, and the managers were strict. She had to go back. On her next shift, the atmosphere was thicker, heavier. The shadows seemed to cling to her like a living cloak, whispering secrets only she could hear. She noticed more changes in the aisles. Shelves that rearranged themselves, products that disappeared, then reappeared in impossible places. Even the customers, few though they were at that hour, moved oddly, their eyes glassy and vacant. Her coworkers were different too. Some were pale and withdrawn. Others talked of nightmares filled with screaming, shadowy figures clawing at them in sleep. A few had quit suddenly, vanishing without notice. Those left avoided certain aisles, or sections altogether. One evening, as Maya walked through aisle 7, she felt a presence behind her. Turning quickly, she found no one. But the overhead lights flickered violently, and the intercom crackled with a distorted voice, whispering, "Join us." Panicked, Maya fled toward the break room, but the path twisted strangely, aisles elongating and bending like a maze. Her flashlight beam caught glimpses of figures moving just beyond her vision, always out of reach but steadily closing in. Desperately, she remembered the basement door. If she could just reach it, maybe she could seal it forever. Racing through the shifting labyrinth, she reached the hidden stairwell, heart pounding. Descending into the basement again, Maya found the air colder, more oppressive. The shadows moved with purpose, converging toward the chamber. The entity's voice echoed, "You cannot escape. You belong to the darkness." Steeling herself, Maya raised the pendant. The light burst forth, pushing back the shadows, illuminating the ancient symbols scrawled on the walls. Chanting words from the old journal she'd found earlier, she fought to banish the malevolent presence. The chamber trembled, the altar cracking as the darkness screamed and retreated. Exhausted but resolute, Maya sealed the door with a ritual drawn from the journal, hoping it would hold Dot back in the store. Daylight brought a fragile calm. But Maya knew the darkness was patient and persistent, waiting for cracks in the seal, ready to return stronger. She vowed to uncover the full truth behind the store's curse, and to protect anyone else who might fall victim to the horrors lurking beneath Walmart's fluorescent glow. Maya's investigation into the store's dark history became an obsession. Days off were spent poring over old newspapers, municipal records, and interviews with townsfolk too afraid to return. She uncovered chilling accounts. Decades ago, the land beneath Walmart was home to a small cult known as the Veil Walkers, who sought to bridge the living world with the shadow realm. Their rituals twisted the very soil, poisoning the ground with ancient curses. The cult's last known act was said to have torn open a rift, a fragile gateway between dimensions that bled darkness into the area. Attempts by the town to seal the breach failed. The land remained scarred, its malevolence simmering just beneath the surface. When Walmart was constructed, no one realized what lay beneath. The building's vast footprint unknowingly trapped the curse within its walls, feeding it with the energies of fear and despair from every late-night shift, every lost soul. Maya reached out to Marie, hoping her experience could provide answers. Marie revealed the truth. Employees who disappeared hadn't just vanished, they were consumed by the darkness. Their souls trapped in the shadow realm, twisted into servitors of the entity. Each night, the veil between worlds thinned. The entity grew stronger, using the store's energy to sustain itself, manifesting as shadowy figures that preyed on the vulnerable. It whispered promises of power, tempting employees to surrender their will. Determined to end the cycle, Maya crafted a plan to perform a cleansing ritual. She gathered protective charms, ancient texts, and blessings from local spiritual leaders. But the entity was cunning. It struck first, targeting Maya's mind with nightmares so vivid they bled into waking life. She woke, drenched in sweat, hearing faint laughter echoing through the empty halls of Walmart. The store had become a battleground between light and shadow. On the night of the ritual, Maya returned to the basement chamber. The atmosphere was electric, shadows writhing like living snakes. Chanting incantations, she traced protective symbols with salt and blessed oil, her voice steady despite the growing roar of the darkness. The entity appeared, more monstrous than ever, a towering silhouette with eyes ablaze. It screamed, lashes of shadow striking at her, but the charms held. Light burst from the pendant, spreading through the chamber, illuminating the ancient runes. Let's move to our 10 Saints story. Walmart's hum was a constant presence in the small town of Millbrook, its fluorescent lights piercing the night like a beacon of commerce and convenience. But for the night shift workers, the store was a different world, one where shadows stretched longer, whispers echoed louder, and the mundane turned sinister. Emma had taken the night shift job out of necessity. A college student juggling classes and bills, the quiet hours seemed manageable. Yet from her very first night, the store felt off. Not just the usual eerie silence of empty aisles, but something deeper, a presence that watched and waited. Her first weeks were filled with strange occurrences. Products rearranged themselves when she wasn't looking. Mannequins seemed to shift position. Overhead lights flickered erratically. More unsettling were the voices, whispers that danced at the edge of hearing, calling her name, murmuring promises she couldn't quite grasp. Emma chalked it up to stress and exhaustion. But as nights passed, the occurrences grew more tangible. A shadow moved just beyond the edge of her flashlight beam, darting between aisles. The temperature dropped suddenly in certain sections, her breath visible despite the store's heating. She found notes scrawled on bathroom mirrors, messages like "You can't hide, and they're watching." One night, a fellow employee vanished. Jake had worked nights for years, but disappeared without a trace. Security cameras showed only static during his last recorded moments. The remaining staff whispered of an old legend, a curse linked to the land beneath Walmart. Emma, driven by fear and curiosity, began researching. She found accounts of the area's dark past. A family massacre on the site decades ago, a disgraced cult leader rumored to have performed forbidden rituals, and tales of a malevolent entity bound beneath the store. Her investigation led her to the basement, sealed and long forgotten. Using an access panel hidden behind storage racks, she descended into the darkness below. The air was thick with decay and coldness, the walls etched with strange symbols that pulsed faintly. The deeper she went, the more the boundary between reality and nightmare blurred. The entity revealed itself not as a shape, but as a consuming presence that warped the very air. It whispered in voices both familiar and alien, offering escape and power in exchange for surrender. Emma fought with every ounce of strength, wielding a charm given by an elderly local who warned her of the darkness. She recited protective incantations, the pendant glowing with an ethereal light that pushed back the shadows. The battle raged beneath Walmart, shaking the foundations and causing lights to flicker overhead. At dawn, the entity was driven back, the basement sealed once more. But Emma knew the fight was far from over. The darkness waited patiently, eternal and hungry. Behind the fluorescent glow of the store, Emma's days blended into restless nights. After the confrontation in the basement, she thought the worst was behind her. But the Walmart's shadows had only grown bolder. The charm she carried, a delicate pendant etched with ancient symbols, offered protection, but it also seemed to tether her closer to the entity's reach. Back on the sales floor, the air remained thick with unease. The store's usual fluorescent hum occasionally warped into low, discordant tones that rattled her bones. Some aisles became unnavigable. Shelves appeared to stretch endlessly, or folded in on themselves, trapping her in pockets of suffocating darkness. The familiar world had warped into a twisted labyrinth. Her co-workers were fractured, some resigned to the creeping dread, others visibly unwell. Whispers of Jake's disappearance haunted break rooms, his vacant locker a grim reminder. Rumors swirled that those who vanished were claimed by the darkness, their souls lost to the abyss beneath. Emma found herself haunted by vivid nightmares. In her dreams, she wandered the basement chamber again, but this time it morphed into a void filled with wailing faces and tendrils of shadow. The entity's voice echoed, promising release from her fears in exchange for surrender. She resisted, clutching her pendant, but the darkness clawed at her mind, blurring the line between sleep and wakefulness. Determined to end the nightmare, Emma sought out others who had worked the night shift over the years. Among them was Sarah, a former employee with haunted eyes and whispered warnings. Sarah spoke of the veil, the thin boundary between worlds that the entity exploited to slip into the waking realm. She revealed that the entity fed on fear and despair, growing stronger with each lost soul. Together, Emma and Sarah devised a plan to perform a cleansing ritual, using ancient rites found in a dusty tome. Sarah had discovered an account written by a cult survivor who had attempted to seal the rift decades ago. On the chosen night, Emma gathered the necessary materials: salt candles, protective symbols drawn in chalk, and her glowing pendant. Sarah joined her, her hands steady despite the weight of years of trauma. Descending into the basement once more, they traced the ritual circle around the altar. The air vibrated with anticipation as the entity stirred, manifesting as a towering shadow with fiery eyes. Its voice a cacophony of torment and rage. Emma and Sarah chanted in unison, their voices steady as the entity lashed out with tendrils of darkness. The pendant's light flared, illuminating the chamber with radiant energy. The shadows shrieked, retreating as the ritual reached its crescendo. The ground trembled. Ancient runes glowed brightly before fading into silence. The entity vanished for now. Exhausted but resolute, Emma and Sarah emerged into the first light of dawn. The store's oppressive atmosphere had lifted, replaced by fragile calm. Yet Emma knew this was only a temporary reprieve. The darkness was eternal, waiting patiently beneath Walmart's fluorescent glow for the next soul to wander too far. Let's move to our 11 Sane story. The night shift at Walmart had always been a strange kind of quiet, too quiet for such a massive building, especially after midnight. But for Lucas, who had only been working there for 2 weeks, the quiet had a strange heaviness to it. Like the building itself was holding its breath. It was his 3rd overnight shift, and he was restocking the cleaning supplies aisle when he noticed something that made him stop mid-step. The floor tiles in front of him had changed. One row of tiles, stretching the entire aisle, was darker, almost damp-looking. He knelt down to touch it, thinking maybe there had been a spill, but the tile wasn't wet. Tea was cold, ice-cold. When he looked up, he realized the end of the aisle looked farther away than it should have. Much farther. The shelves seemed to stretch on endlessly into the darkness, even though he knew from experience that the store's back wall should have been just a few steps away. He blinked hard, and the aisle snapped back to normal length, the end cap just a few yards away. Long night hallucinations, he muttered to himself, forcing a chuckle. But the unease didn't leave by 2 a.m. He was working in the back room, where towering stacks of boxed merchandise cast strange shadows under the dim, fluorescent lights. That's when he heard its 3 slow knocks. Knock, knock, knock. He froze, scanning the empty room. The sound came again, this time from somewhere inside the walls. Probably just the pipes. He whispered, though even saying it out loud didn't convince him, when he finally mustered the courage to investigate. The knocking led him toward a part of the stockroom he'd never seen before. Narrow door, partially hidden behind a mountain of broken-down cardboard. It was old, rusted, and clearly hadn't been opened in years. But the knocks were coming from the other side. Lucas pulled the door open, and a wave of cold, damp air hit him in the face. The hallway beyond was narrow and dim, lined with peeling paint and flickering lights that didn't seem connected to the rest of the stores. Electricity. He stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of mildew, but underneath that was something else, something sharp and metallic. As he walked, he noticed faint symbols scratched into the walls, circles, lines, and jagged shapes he didn't recognize. The further he went, the darker and colder it became, and then, he heard whispering at first. It was too faint to make out. Just an indistinct murmur, like someone talking from the end of a long tunnel. But with every step, the voices grew clearer, yet they spoke in no language Lucas recognized. The words were guttural and broken, twisting in ways that made his head ache. When he rounded the corner, he saw them at least. He thought they were mannequins at first, dozens of them, standing in the hallway, dressed in ragged Walmart uniforms. From decades ago. Their faces were pale, their eyes glassy, their mouths slightly open, as if But when Lucas blinked, their heads had turned, every one of them now, staring directly at him. He stumbled back, and that's when one of the mannequins stepped forward. Its neck jerked at unnatural angles, and its mouth stretched wider than it should have been. "You shouldn't be here." The voice was layered, several voices speaking in unison. Male and female, young and old, all bleeding together into one dreadful sound. Lucas bolted back the way he came, slamming the rusted door shut behind him. The next day, he tried to tell one of his co-workers, a grizzled old man named Fred, who had been with the store for 15 years. Fred listened quietly, then nodded. "You found the service tunnels," he said, his voice grim. "This place was built over an old asylum. Nobody talks about it, but the foundation's still there. The tunnels lead to the basement they never tore down." Lucas felt his stomach twist. Why would they leave it? Fred just shook his head. "Because you can't tear out what's buried in the ground. You can only build on top of it, and hope it stays quiet." For the next week, Lucas tried to avoid that part of the store. But the knocking didn't stop. Every night, no matter where he was, back room, sales floor, even the break room, he'd hear those 3 slow knocks. And sometimes, the whispers. Then, one night, while stocking the frozen food section, he saw something move behind the glass doors. At first he thought it was a trick of the reflection, but then it stepped forward. It was the thing from the tunnel. Its skin was mottled and torn, hanging in strips, its limbs too long for its body. The same many-voiced whisper poured from its gaping mouth. The glass fogged over as it leaned close, its hand pressing to the inside of the freezer door. And then, the door creaked open. The frozen air rushed out, and the creature stepped in too. The aisle. From that night on, Lucas wasn't just hearing things, he was seeing them everywhere. Aisles that stretched on for impossible distances. Shadows that moved against the light. Customers who weren't customers at all, staring at him with glassy eyes before vanishing around corners. Fred gave him a warning. "If they start following you outside the store, you're done. Best quit before it happens." But Lucas needed the job. Bills didn't pay themselves, and Walmart didn't ask too many questions. On his final shift, everything came to a head. Around 3:15 a.m., the store went completely silent. No hum of lights, no beeping registers, no distant chatter from the few overnight shoppers. Just silence. And then, from every aisle, they came the figures in old uniforms, their heads twitching, their mouths opening in perfect unison. Knock. Knock, knock. Lucas turned toward the sound, and there it was, the creature, larger now. Its form shifting and writhing like it was made of liquid shadow. It lunged, and the lights went out. When they came back on, Lucas was gone. The managers claimed he'd quit without notice. Fred didn't believe it. Every so often, while stocking shelves late at night, he hears a faint knocking from the maintenance door. Sometimes, if he listens closely, he swears he can hear Lucas's voice among the whispers, calling for help from somewhere deep below the store. And the knocking never stops. Let's move to our 12th story. It was just after 2:30 in the morning when Rachel finished mopping the last stretch of Walmart's electronics department. The store was technically still open. This particular location operated 24/7, but, at that hour, only the occasional truck driver or insomniac wandered through the aisles. Rachel liked the quiet. It was a relief from the chaos of the daytime rush, the screaming kids, the endless questions about prices and refunds. At night, the fluorescent lights hummed like a mechanical lullaby, and she could go about her work without interruption. Or at least, that's how it had been before the strange things started happening. It began with a noise, a low, dragging sound from the toy aisle. She froze mid-step, the mop dripping onto the tile. It wasn't the sound of wheels, more like something heavy being pulled along the floor. She thought maybe it was maintenance moving stock, but she knew that Frank, the only other overnight employee that shift, was restocking the grocery side. She set the mop against the wall and moved toward the sound. The toy aisle looked normal at first. Glass shelves lined with dolls, action figures, and board games, but halfway down, a plush bear lay on the floor. Not unusual, except that Rachel swore it hadn't been there moments before. She bent to pick it up. Its fur was matted, darker in spots, almost like it had been wet and left to dry. She was about to place it back on the shelf when she heard the sound again, dragging. Closer now, but she couldn't see anything moving. She left the bear and turned the corner into the next aisle, expecting to catch someone messing around. But the aisle was empty. Only, she noticed something strange. A faint trail of wetness on the tile, like something had been pulled through a puddle. The trail led deeper into the store, toward the seasonal section. She hesitated. She didn't want to call Frank yet. He'd just laugh and say she was imagining things, but something about the cold creeping into her skin told her this wasn't just a misplaced toy. The trail ended in front of the old display freezers. Most of them were empty now, waiting for the holiday shipments to come in. But one freezer door was fogged up, and inside, something was pressed against the glass. Rachel leaned in, wiping away condensation with her sleeve. She staggered back. Immediately, it was the bear. The same one she'd left in the toy aisle. But now its button eyes were cracked, and its mouth, stitched shut moments ago, was ripped open, revealing something black and glistening inside. She backed away, heart pounding, but the freezer door creaked open on its own. Cold air spilled out thick with the smell of mildew and something else, something metallic. She slammed it shut, but as she turned, she saw movement in the reflection of the glass. A figure, tall, thin, with limbs too long to belong to any normal person, standing behind her. Rachel spun around, but the aisle was empty. The figure was gone. She didn't realize she'd been holding her breath until the sound came again, this time not dragging, but tapping. A slow, deliberate knock, knock, knock. From somewhere in the store, she decided she'd had enough, and hurried toward the staff area to find Frank. The tapping followed her, echoing from different directions, as though something unseen was circling her. When she finally reached the break room, she found Frank's coffee cup still steaming on the table, his half-eaten sandwich beside it. The door to the maintenance hallway was slightly ajar. "Frank," she called, stepping forward. The hallway was dim, lit only by a single buzzing bulb. The air was colder here, much colder. And there, halfway down, she saw Frank slumped against the wall, eyes open but glassy, like he was staring at something far away. "Frank, are you okay?" As she approached, she noticed his hands were gripping something tightly. It was another toy, this one, a plastic fire truck. Only, the wheels were turning on their own, spinning so fast, they rattled. She tried to pull it from his grip, but his hands were stiff, almost locked. Then, the spinning wheels stopped, and from the tiny speaker inside the toy came a distorted voice. "Don't stay here." The lights flickered. Rachel backed away, but the moment she did, Frank's head jerked toward her, his neck moving in a way that made her stomach twist. His mouth opened wider than it should have, stretching until it looked like it would tear. And from that dark gap came the same dragging sound she'd heard before. She ran. She didn't look back. She tore through the aisles, passing displays that seemed wrong. Now mannequins turned to face her. Stuffed animals with torn seams. Shopping carts that rolled toward her without anyone pushing them. When she finally made it to the front doors, they didn't open. She slammed her hands against the glass, but outside, the parking lot was gone. Instead, there was only darkness, thick and endless, pressing against the windows like an ocean of shadow. Her reflection stared back at her, but it wasn't her face anymore. It smiled,